I listened to some more music.
It might be over soon. Soon, soon. It might be over soon.
I don't really know where to start with this one. I mean, I guess I could tell you about what Bon Iver is exactly. They are an American folk band primarily led by singer-songwriter Justin Vernon, with a handful of albums and EPs under their belt. The main two I'm going to be focusing on are these projects right here, 22 Million and I. And, yeah, that's it. I don't really have much more to say about them. I just really want to talk about these albums, explore them, and why I think they're so good. So let's just do that. This album is such a unique experience. I feel like I've said this a lot through all the records I've talked about on this channel, but God, this one may take the cake for the strangest initial listening experience I've had with a project. I wasn't even sure if I liked it or not. This is due in large part to the production, which is some of the most insane and creative I've heard in an album. It makes heavy use of these strange vocal snippets and samples, which are manipulated, looped, and pitch-shifted to such a way that they are just as much of an instrument as any of the other more traditional elements in the mix. For example, the opening track 22 Over Soon, which I played in the intro. As you heard, the song starts off with this looping, distorted snippet that eventually gets interlaced with yet another sample, eventually building and building until Justin Vernon's voice kicks in, delivering a stunningly poetic and beautiful verse. In fact, that can generally be used to describe the structure of a lot of the different tracks on here. They will often start out with a strange, scattered, and unwelcoming sample or loop, and then from there they continue to lace in more and more elements that all feel really disconnected and nonsensical, that it's hard to imagine them coming together to form anything beautiful or profound. But then as the song builds more and more traditional elements begin to be added into the chaotic mess of samples already filling the mix, then just something begins to click. Take the song 10 Death Breaths, for example, starting off with harsh, unwelcoming drums before turning into this otherworldly anthem filled by intensely layered vocals and beautiful horn passages. It doesn't feel like it should work, but somehow it does, and everything comes together in the chaos to form something beautiful. Or how about 33 God, where this beautiful synth is contrasted by these strangely pitched samples and Vernon's intricately layered falsetto. It seems like it should be a huge mess, but then around 1 minute into the song these driving, compressed drums kick in, and for a second everything just makes so much sense, and everything after this point is pure bliss, from the more spacey and bare section that showcases Vernon's vocal delivery to the more atmospheric outro to the song featuring this strange chipmunked chorus along with yet more vocal samples fading back into the mix. And before I break down the finale of the album, I want to point out just a few more moments of sheer beauty that floored me off this thing from pretty much every other track. The distorted and deeply layered chorus on 29 Stratford apps, including the final refrain that is so distorted it sounds like there's something wrong with your headphones. The constantly building and explosive 666 upside down cross with its low-key synths and bombastic outbursts during the chorus, followed by 21 Moonwater, a more dreamy and atmospheric song that showcases ambient synths and contains some of the more abstract writing on the album. 8 Circle once again shows how well this album's sound works when it's allowed to slowly build and develop over the course of a track, with the instrumental becoming more and more all-encompassing around Vernon's vocals until they basically swallow the whole mix, with the chorus essentially becoming another instrument in the back. And for the last track before the finale, there's 45, and this track is one of the best showcases of something unique about this album I don't think is in any other project. You see, to aid with the project's sound, an engineer named Chris Messina created a mix of software and hardware dubbed the Messina that essentially acts as a special sort of synth just for Bon Iver to use. And most of the vocal and instrumental manipulation is heavily in debt to it, and this is the song that I think showcases that the best. And then finally, the closing track, A Million. This track mostly focuses on a couple of elements, Vernon's layered and manipulated vocals and this beautiful piano. There are more parts to it, such as a few repeated vocal samples and some guitars, but for the most part this is a ballad wrapping up the themes of the entire experience. I haven't touched on it for the most part, but this album has a running theme of dualism, the difference and the paradoxical intersection between life and death, love and loss, those sort of things. And it really comes to a head on this, with Vernon stating on the final line of the album, "If it's harmed me, it's harmed me. It'll harm me, I'll let it in." I really, really, really like this album. That's stupid. I find it super creative, strange, interesting, and above all, profoundly beautiful. That's not to say it's perfect, though. Some songs can be more meandering, and a lot of the less structured tracks can feel aimless and without payoff. And while I see that as the most part complementary to the main musical and poetic theme of the project as a whole, going track by track, it might be easy to be skeptical of the lack of direction on some tracks. For example, 715 Creeks lacks any build or traditional structure, and while I find it a compelling and interesting track, if you're not into the layered vocals, there's not going to be much for you to appreciate on it. But while it's not for everyone, 22 Million is at the very least an insanely creative and special project. And while to some it may be seen as just a mess, to me it's a mess that somehow conveys more beauty and meaning than most other conventional folk albums.
You recording, Trevor?
Yes.
Coming 3 years after 22 Million, I is the spiritual successor to the project, and while I think overall it is a more flawed album, it's still quite a great project. It features a more traditional sound than 22, with the more experimental touches being added as more of a garnish on top of the grand folk sound presented on the rest of it. It features a lot of catchy choruses, beautiful horn passages, intricate song structures, and more groovy and driving guitars. Firstly, what I want to get out of the way is what I find flawed about the project, because I do think there are spots where it could be improved. My main issue isn't even with the more traditionally folky sound, it's more of a handful of tracks that structurally don't go anywhere or develop. And I know I said that on 22 Million that kind of added to the experience for me, but here it doesn't work as well. On 22, each song, no matter how meandering or underdeveloped, benefited from wild experimentation and uniqueness. Both the more traditionally structured and produced these moments where the tracks don't seem to go anywhere are a lot more apparent and even boring. Songs like Holy Fields and Gelmore are where this is the most apparent, as they are mostly the same instrumental looped for a while over Vernon's singing. But there are other small moments on other tracks, such as Salem, where I feel like they could have benefited from a more bombastic or satisfying conclusion than what they actually landed on. Salem, though, is actually one of the better tracks regardless. But hey, you know what they say, for every Gelmore, there's a name. I kept saying name in these clips, it's naive, it's not name. I said, why did I say name? And God? Do some of these tracks hate. I Me, Haymon, Name, Faith, Salem, Shadiah, all fantastic tracks. They really benefit from the more full and folky sound, with touches of experimentation and sampling, adding to the atmosphere and character of each track. Hey Ma, for example, is a very sweet song that feels super triumphant with the upbeat drums, beautiful strings right in the back of the mix, and of course Justin Vernon's falsetto right front and center. This whole album in general is a lot more upbeat and hopeful than 22 Million. While that album felt like a confusing wasteland of dispersed musical elements all coming together to form something beautiful, this feels more like the happy conclusion to that wasteland, the rebuilding of society based off those elements. That I got kind of weird with the analogies here. Name is another beautiful track, and probably my favorite song out of either of these two projects. With the beautiful piano-filled intro, Vernon's strange and abstract poetry leading up to a short but amazingly beautiful chorus, it's such a great intro to the track. And then once again, Bon Iver shows their knack for crafting incredible builds, as leading up to the second chorus, more and more elements are introduced until they reach the emotional climax of the song at the third verse. The guitars get louder in the mix, the drums pick up a newer, more energetic beats, the samples that were sprinkled through the song previously fade out to the back of the mix, being replaced by luscious horns. And then, it lets you down, slowly, with the chorus fading back over a much more simplified instrumental until the song itself is left to its most basic elements, playing itself out. It's such a beautiful song, and it really has the emotional weight that makes it feel like you're moving on from something. Fitting, I guess, since Vernon has said that it acts as a sort of end to the first act of the album. From here on, there are a lot more musical highlights. The light and uplifting sounding Faith with its fittingly angelic group vocals, Salem with its melodic and grand presentation. There's a lot to love. But what I want to focus on is the lyricism. You see, in 22 Million, the lyrics were poetic and abstract, but usually pretty decipherable. I can look at this and tell you what it means for the most part. But in II, the writing is significantly more abstract. Look at this. And tell me, what's being said here? I need help, I don't really get it. But this isn't really a bad thing, in my opinion. In fact, the abstract lyrics that read more of a collection of random distorted memories and thoughts rather than comprehensible sentences help to illustrate the pure emotion that is going into these songs. Something that Vernon does incredibly well here is distill his pure emotional state into a digestible and often beautiful passage that, even if messy while viewed up close, when put in conjunction with the wonderful, intricate instrumentals, creates a wholly fulfilling experience. So does this album have problems? Yeah, of course. And problems that I can defend less easily than I could with 22 Million. But does this album make up for every misstep with an equally beautiful, captivating, and emotional track? Yes, so many times, yes. It's a wonderful album, and if you want a more comprehensive and structurally satisfying listen, I'd go with this. Technically, it does feel like more songs are complete, more ideas are fleshed out, and while that does mean its missteps are more clear and obvious, it also means that its best are some of the best folk songs to be released in recent memory. So what have we learned? Well, one, you should listen to these albums, but two, Bon Iver is incredible at capturing the messy, chaotic, and beautiful process of, processing emotions. Both these albums are a very holistic and gratifying experience if you're willing to give them the time and the attention they need. These are not background albums. When you listen to these, you really need to focus in and listen. And I promise that if you do, even if you don't like it that much, you'll be greeted with some incredibly interesting and creative songs and moments. So I guess that's it for this one. If you haven't, go check these out. And if you have, feel free to tell me what you thought of them, or if you really got anything out of them at all. I'll see you next time with whatever I decide to cover next. Have a great day.
Here we go.